My name's Teresa Hay. I'm a criminal practitioner, and my job today is just to sort of compare this incredible panel of practitioners that we have, who are all going to tell you a little bit about their working lives, how they came to the bar, and other things that they think you might find interesting. And then we're going to open the floor to you. So if you have any burning questions about what it's like to be a barrister, what it's like doing the training, anything at all, this day is for you to ask us questions and us to answer them honestly. And I know that you've had a fair bit of honesty from members of the Inn already this morning. So we're going to go in what is technically order of seniority, which means the person who was called first in time, that's Lorianne. And then we're going to move through the line. But what you'll see is that seniority in terms of call doesn't necessarily translate to seniority in terms of experience, which is also one of the interesting things we hope you'll take away from this morning. So I'm going to wander down to Lorianne, who is a criminal practitioner. She's what is known in the business as a heavyweight criminal practitioner, and her particular experience and expertise has finally been recognised because she was made a silk at Queen's Counsel on Monday. And I'm not at all embarrassed to say I've got a little bit of a counsel's crush on Lorianne. So Lorianne, over to you.
Thank you, Teresa. Hi, guys. So this is my first formal mentoring event as a silk. How crazy is that? And it's just luck, but I couldn't have picked a better place to do this talk, because about 23 or so years ago, I walked in the door here for a scholarship interview. I had essentially come to the end of my journey in trying to be a barrister. I grew up on a East London council estate. I left school. I had a baby very young. I'd worked part-time, doing all sorts of jobs to try and get to the bar. And where I came from, people didn't really know what a barrister was or what it did or even how it was possible to get here. And so I had no money. And back then, way back then, you didn't get paid for pupillage. So it was either call it a day and check out, or somebody's going to have to really help me out. And where's Krista? There she is. Krista, all those years ago, had recommended that I apply for a scholarship, and I did, and I was given more money than I even knew what to do with. And it allowed me to carry on my journey and jump forward 22 years. I'm now Queen's Counsel, the 7th Black Queen's Counsel in the United Kingdom. So why do I tell you that? Well, I tell you that because the bar is the kind of place where people don't really know what goes on until you get in it, until you immerse yourself in it. It's all a bit mysterious, and people say, well, I want to be a barrister. I don't really know what a barrister is or does. So the first thing I want you to take away from me is don't be put off. Don't be put off. Wherever you come from, whatever walk of life you are, whatever background you are, whatever demographic you come from, don't be put off. If this is your journey, if this is your dream and your passion and your goal, you go for it. And we are here to help as much as we can. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, it's the best job in the world. I still get butterflies every morning when I get up and go to court. And when I put on that silk robe for the first time, I felt like Batgirl. Like literally, I felt like I could fly. It's strange. Why is it the best job in the world? Well, we're not just vain. We don't just like the sounds of our own voices. It's a huge responsibility. The people that we deal with come to us at the lowest points of their life. I deal primarily with murder, terrorism, very serious crime. So there are often victims involved, but there are also people who have been accused of serious offences involved. And we are their mouthpiece. That's a massive responsibility. Sometimes it's the difference between living and not living. Literally, a life sentence could be at the end of it. And that has huge ramifications for not just the person that you represent, but for the wider families and the wider communities and society as a whole. So it's a massive responsibility. So that's the second reason it's the best job in the world. But we all know, being at the bar, and also me particularly being a criminal barrister, we know that there are often many different things that are there and that might put you off. And so what should you do in order to work out whether or not you really want to commit to the profession, or maybe you want to go an alternative route? But immerse yourself in it. You know, it's events like these that we didn't really have much of in my day, that you immerse yourself in. Go to chambers, access mini pupilages, just go and sit in a courtroom, whether it's a commercial or public or criminal. Immerse yourself in the world and just align yourself to somebody. Like, get an email address from a barrister and just bombard them with emails. You know, just be that person that does not give up. Okay, so that's my journey to the bar, in short. That's what I do on a daily basis. We've been given 5 minutes, so please do feel free to ask me any questions. Just in terms of where you are, I think you're all around university level. Is that right? Probably some a bit younger. So it's relatively early stage to work out what area of law you want to do. Some people may have a set intention to be crime or human rights or commercial. Some people may not know. So from here on in, your journey really is about preparing for those really important applications. So you'll finish your undergraduate soon, you'll then do the bar course or the LPC, whichever way we want you to come to the bar, that's why we're here. But if you choose to do the bar, you really need to be thinking from now, what am I going to be able to say in 2 or 3 years' time to those people who are interviewing me about why it is that I'm committed to this career? Why it is that I have a genuine interest in criminal defense work or human rights work or public law work. So start thinking about, be strategic. I mark pupillage applications. I've just finished marking 169 of them. And what makes an applicant stand out is where I can see a genuine desire to be a part of a particular field of law, and that will be reflected in your work experience. That will be reflected in the kind of things that you do, such as mooting and advocacy. And so just immerse yourself in the world. It is a separate world. It's unlike any other, but it's also filled with much, much support. So access your in, whether it's this in or another in, or access those ins. Go onto Chambers websites, because the websites have different insight days where you can go. You don't even have to leave your house. The Bar Council the same, the Bar Standard Board's the same. And so I wish you all the best of luck on your journey, whatever stage. I really hope to see you as part of Middle and at the bar, or whatever route you choose. Just remember that everyone will say the bar is difficult. It is difficult, but it's difficult for a reason, because we really only want the best, because representation is really, really important. So don't give up. If someone says you can't, tell them you'll see. And I hope to see you here in the future, standing where I am. In 22 years' time, I won't be here. I don't think even Krista might not be here. But yeah, so good luck, guys.
See why I've got me the girl. Our next speaker is Karen Reid. Karen was called in 2010. She's a human rights lawyer who works in the Asylum and Immigration Chamber, particularly dealing with minors and people who've been victims of human trafficking. So a very different area of practice, right?
Thank you very much. I'm going to stay sitting down, because if I try to stand, I won't look anywhere near as cool as Lorianne did, and I'll probably fall over on the way there. So hi, everyone. Good morning. As Tessa said, I was called in, Teresa, as I was called in 2010. I'm quite surprised that I'm the second most senior person in the room, because I didn't get pupillage straight away. You've probably heard already that the statistics for pupillage are not great. Far more people do the bar course than there are pupillages available. So the number of people who have a pupillage by the time they've finished the bar course is actually very small, and I was one of the ones who didn't. So in 2010, having been called, I went and worked for an Afghan charity that was based in the UK, supporting refugees and asylum seekers. And I went in originally as an advocate and was eventually promoted to their head of advocacy. At the time, I thought I wanted to do criminal and family law, But working with refugees made me, well, I didn't even know that immigration was really an area of law at that time. It wasn't something I'd studied on the law conversion course, and it wasn't something that I'd really been exposed to. But I realized that there was actually a desperate need for people to have good representation in immigration. So I qualified separately under a scheme that's run by the Office of the Immigration Service Commissioner, and was able to start representing people in their immigration claims. Having done that for about a year and a half, I succeeded in getting pupillage, but that didn't start for another year, so I worked for another year before I went and did pupillage. And by that stage, I decided that immigration was what I really loved, and I went and did pupillage at a general common law set. So I had 4 different pupil supervisors. One did immigration, one did crime, one did family, and one did commercial. So I got to see 4 completely different areas of law during my pupillage, which was absolutely fantastic experience. I did love criminal law. Unfortunately, I never actually got to do a jury trial because the one jury trial I was going to get to do, none of the prosecution witnesses turned up. So it was technically successful for my client, but not a great day out for the experience I thought it was going to be. But I still loved immigration, so that's where I've kind of developed my practice. And then later on, I have started to go into housing law as well. So mostly representing people who have applied to local authorities for housing because they're, technically homeless, although not usually street homeless, and challenging the decisions that local authorities make, either in respect of whether or not they're actually entitled to housing or to do with the standard of the housing that they've been put in. And then I now have a sort of crossover area where I represent people who are either currently seeking asylum in the UK or have recently been recognised as refugees, and they are challenging the accommodation that the government has put them in. So that sort of brings in both my areas of immigration and housing. I absolutely love it. I think you need to love it to do this job because you're quite often up very early in the morning to get work done before you have to be in court at 10 a.m. You quite often have to travel long distances in order to get to court. We quite often go to very unglamorous court buildings. I mean, this makes it all look absolutely fabulous. But when you're in an immigration centre near Heathrow Airport where you can hear the jet planes going over, the ceiling's leaking, there's a bucket in the middle of the room to sort of pick up the drips from that. No one can open the windows because they've lost the key. This is another world from those days. But then there are days when I've realised that I'm not in court the next day. I don't have any pressing deadlines. The next day's weather forecast is really sunny, and I've just told the clerks to block me out because I'm going to go to Thorpe Park for the day. So there are advantages to being self-employed, as well as, the days when you're sort of sitting on a train to Manchester at 5 o'clock in the morning and you've had to leave before there was even a bacon sandwich available at Euston Station for you. It's definitely swings and roundabouts, but overall, I would agree it is the best job in the world. I really hope that you will all decide that the bar is the career for you. I hope you'll decide to join Middle Temple. When I'm not being a barrister, I'm also the chair of Hall Committee here at Middle Temple, and I've been asked to say a little bit about that as well. The Hall Committee looks after everyone from when they're called to the bar until they become a master of the bench, so quite a big sort of population of the inn, and we represent them on all of the inn's committees, try to identify issues that might be facing people in their day-to-day lives as barristers and look at ways that the inn can support them throughout their entire careers. Middle Temple is not now the only inn to have a separate organisation to support people from when they're called to the bar until the sort of first few years of practice, but we were the first inn to have such an organisation. And I will talk about that as well, because I think that is the thing that does make us the best inn. That's the Middle Temple Young Barristers Association, and they do, as I've said, it is a challenge to get pupillage. When you're a student, there's loads of support. There's mooting competitions, there's essay competitions. It's very easy to get work experience and fit it around university holidays and things. But once you're doing a full-time job, that becomes a lot harder. So having an organisation specifically to support people who haven't got pupillage at the end of their bar course is actually a really important thing. And I think as an inn, we are the best inn for doing that. Hopefully no one from the other inns is listening, but they're definitely not here to correct me. I think I've probably gone over my 5 minutes, and I should probably hand the microphone over. But hopefully we'll see you all at Middle Temple again soon.
So our next speaker is Simon Robottom. You can spot the odd one out. He was called in 2000. I'm not calling you odd, Simon. Please don't misunderstand me. He was called in 2001, family lawyer who does work in the family and the Court of Protection. Used to practice in Manchester, but now has been sucked into the Middle Temple family and now come down to practice in London. Simon, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I thought, if it's okay with you, that I will first tell you a little bit about family law and then how I got to where I am. It's very loud, isn't it? You can hear yourself. Anyway, I'll carry on. So I don't know how many of you are studying family law on your law courses. Anybody? Some tentative hands. Well, if you get the chance to study it, I would thoroughly suggest it, because it is far more academically rigorous than people think that it is, but it is also incredibly relevant to people's lives. Who there thinks that they have engaged with family law so far in their lives? Hands up. Oh, a good number. Well, how many of you were born? I imagine most of you. Yeah. Well, from the point that you're born, the Children Act kicks in and it assigns who has responsibility for you, who should be looking after you, and then as you grow up, it continues. Some of you, are you thinking of getting married? Any of you? You've got to. It keeps me in work. Or if you have children, all of these things are areas that my job touches upon. We work with children, both in terms of private law, which is disputes between parents or carers, but also public children law, which is when the state intervenes to remove children where it's felt that their parents can't provide good enough care. I also work in financial remedies on divorce, and I work in the Court of Protection. And within all of those areas, there are lots of different specialisms. Some people do a lot of international work, so relocation abroad, international child abduction. I think it's a fascinating area. And as I say, at some point, all of you will come across family law in some way or another. But how did I get to do family law? Well, my mum is a child protection social worker, as is my brother now. My mum thinks I've completely sold out, but I don't think I have. Much like my criminal colleagues, family and crime touch on areas in people's lives that are probably the most extreme types of orders and provisions that the court can make in your life. So, life sentences in the criminal courts. Within family law, we deal with orders that can remove a child from their family not long after birth and mean that that child has no contact with their parents, possibly ever again. We're the only country in the world that has what's called closed adoption and forced adoption, so against the parents' consent. Those areas are some of the most extreme and draconian powers that the court has. So it's a huge responsibility to be working with the families or with the state. And my mum has introduced me to it because that's what she did, and that's her job still, actually. She should be retiring, but she loves it too much. I was very lucky to meet a barrister and a solicitor that were working on a case with Mum, and I spent half an hour chatting to them, and I heard from the solicitor, and I heard from the barrister, and I knew instantly which route I would rather go down. And I've been really lucky. My path to the bar, I can't say, has been as difficult as it has for others. But financially, what I can say is I couldn't have been here were it not for the inn. So my one tip for you guys is speak to Krista about scholarship deadlines, because so many people miss them. And I don't know why, but they are quite early, aren't they, Krista? Great. Because you don't get the money unless you apply. So that's what I do. That's family law. If you've got any questions, please do ask. Oh, the one other thing I was going to say was, in order to do family law, I decided to go to a common law chambers, which is the same as Karen. I don't know how many others here are common law sets, but who knows what common law means? Who knows what a common law chambers is? Some blank faces. So, who doesn't? So a common law chambers traditionally means that we do a real mix. So you can do crime, you can do personal injury, clinical negligence, family, and it's a great chambers to go to if you are unsure about your specific interest, because it gives you exposure to all types of practice. And actually, there's a lot to be said. I tell you, the criminal lawyers, their knowledge of evidence is far superior. In the family courts, rules of evidence sort of go out the window. But there's lots to be learned from different fields. So I wouldn't rule out doing a mixed practice at the start. The other thing I'd say is, and I say this as someone that has come to London and sold out, don't rule out practice on circuits. London is one of many great places to practice law in England and Wales, not Scotland, that's a different jurisdiction, but England and Wales, there are chambers all over the country, really great areas of practice, and so when you are applying for pupillage, don't just limit yourself geographically. And the last thing I've been asked to talk to you about is in 2019, just before lockdown, the inn started an LGBTQ plus forum. I hope that from this panel today you can see that Middle Temple is improving in its diversity, and also it's an incredibly welcoming inn. We've had now 2 openly gay master treasurers. Last year, Andrew Hockhouse was our second, and their shields are, I think they're just outside, aren't they, Krista, on the wall outside? So if you want to go and look for them. But the LGBTQ plus forum is engaged with raising visibility within the inn for those members who want to, because there is no reason in this day and age why anybody should feel that they can't be out and proud and a barrister, which hasn't always been the case, but it is today. So if any of you out there were wondering, that's the answer to that. So,
thank you, Simon. So our next speaker is Christina Warner, another family lawyer, private and family law. An interesting route to the bar, and Christina, I'm going to let you tell them all about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm Christina. I practice in family and I have an aside in animal protection law. So I did a degree in English law and Spanish law with a year abroad, which I think made my CV stand out slightly than just doing traditional LLB. And having an additional language, I think, has been really useful, in particular because my background was as a solicitor originally. But I'll tell you a little bit more about how I got my very first job in law. So I grew up in South London. I'm also a London girl, Croydon. And I was the first in my family to go to university. I'm still the only one in my family that has a degree. Or 2 degrees, because I did a master's after, but I'll get onto that in a second. And I got my first job in law after having worked in retail for many, many years. And most of you, I think, wouldn't know what's called the Yellow Pages. The Yellow Pages was before the internet, in the before times. There was a book where people would advertise their businesses. And I'm really showing my age now. Yes, Nana. Yes, that's me. So I was so determined to get a job in law, and I didn't know anyone. I got the Yellow Pages, and I went through all of the solicitors' firms and called every single one within my area. And I got to one particular solicitor's, and I was so bouncy on the phone and was offering to make tea and do photocopying and faxing, because back then faxing was a thing as well. And I was fortunate enough to get a job as a receptionist there doing exactly that. And I was so immensely proud of having a job at a criminal defence solicitors firm, a high street firm, where, as already has been said, the glamour of inside Middle Temple is nothing like what your average high street firm is like. There was damp coming through the ceiling and a bucket on the floor collecting all the drips, but I loved it. I was so proud to be there, and that was whilst I was doing my degree and working numerous jobs, because I had to work in order to pay for my accommodation and in order to pay for my fees as well. And then I did a master's, and I went on to qualify as a solicitor. Now, I was very lucky because I was exposed to advocacy, to representing clients in court very early on in my career as a solicitor, as a trainee solicitor. And I thought to myself, could I be a barrister? I'll give it a go. And there's certain routes that you can take as a solicitor. You can get what's called higher rights of audience. So solicitors are limited to at the levels of court that they can represent individuals, whilst barristers they're able to represent at all levels. And I did that exam. I did what's called the higher rights of audience exam, passed it, and I became a barrister and got a tenancy in chambers. I've been so lucky because I feel that the opportunities that have come about as a result of meeting people, and I emphasize I knew no one in law, hence my Yellow Pages story. I knew no one, but I ended up practicing crime for a long, long time, and as already has been said, when you crime is an area that's really, it's anchored by the rules of evidence. And as a family practitioner now, I feel that having practiced crime has really allowed me to try and be the best advocate I can be in the family courts, and also when I deal with animal protection matters as well. I worked at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, at the Office of the Prosecutor as well, for a year, which was phenomenal, and I became a magistrate. I can't remember off the top of my head when it is I became a magistrate. It was a long time ago. I became a magistrate, so I sit on criminal cases, appeal cases, and family cases. And I've been asked to discuss with yourselves about disability as well. A couple of years ago, I noticed that there was a steep decline in my eyesight. And last year I was diagnosed with a condition called Stargardt's, which is a form of juvenile macular degeneration. And the way I describe that to people is, it's the way that older people lose their eyesight, but happening to younger people. My brother has the same condition. He's a lot more advanced in terms of the deterioration of his sight, but essentially I'm losing my eyesight. As far as I'm concerned, although I can't see your faces, there should be no sad faces, because the journey that I've been on in terms of managing my practice alongside my disability has led me to meet some phenomenal people through Middle Temple. I can't emphasize that enough. If any of you have disabilities or feel that if you are a carer for someone with a disability, and that you feel that may stop you or prevent you from a career at the bar, Middle Temple is where you need to be, because they will give you the support that you need. I'm very proudly a barrister with a disability, and I like to tell anyone that will listen, because I think it's important that we're represented. And as I said, I've met some phenomenal barristers along the way who have either sensory challenges like myself, so they may be hard of hearing, or they may be blind. They may have mobility challenges, so they may be walking aid users or wheelchair users, and they may have neurological challenges which may have come about as a result of a stroke. And they are all successful barristers, and they all have great practices, and they are definitely people to know. So I think that's me. I think that's it.
Thank you. So our final speaker is Freddie Onslow, the most junior of our panel, called in 2017 and practices, I understand, in commercial litigation. So again, a completely different area of practice. Thanks.
Thank you. I will first very, very briefly tell you about how I got to where I am, and then I'll sort of explain the commercial bar because it's slightly different. I studied material science at university, which is you've probably never heard of because it's quite a bizarre degree, but it's a bit like engineering, but more boring. I then did the law conversion, and then I did the bar course, and then I did pupillage, and now I'm here, so pretty uninspiring. I am a commercial barrister. What does that mean? Well, it's essentially people with more money than sense arguing with each other about their money. Now, you've heard about family law, you've heard about criminal law, you've heard about lots of different aspects of the bar, and I'm always absolutely amazed that people can do that, because I know that dealing with people in those sorts of circumstances, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. So essentially I've sold out, but I'm fine with that, I think. What do? I spend a mix of my time doing cases where I'm led, and that means I work with a silk or a QC in a team, and they tend to be the ones worth hundreds of millions of pounds, the cases. And then I do some stuff by myself, which means I get to go to court still by myself. I go to court probably far less than everyone here, which is why, and I do less advocacy, so you'll note that I'm less good at speaking. I'd say I go to court maybe once every 2-3 weeks, rather than once a day. When I'm not in court, I'm sitting at my desk and I'm thinking about things and writing them down, is pretty much how I describe it. Quite a lot of time in meetings. In terms of the sort of cases I do, there is a range. I've done cases which involve sort of explosions on ships in the middle of the Atlantic, and that's quite fun, I think. I've done a literal explosion. Well, not fun if you're on the ship, because then you end up dead, which is obviously not good. I'm not suggesting that was fun. I've done a case of discrimination against a big bank, which was fun, again, because there was no actual discrimination. I've done cases with sort of large pharmaceutical businesses, and where they all hate each other because they've been running it and they're accusing each other of fraud. I thought that was quite fun. I'm doing a case now which is not fun, so it's not all fun and games. I'm doing a case about sort of decommissioning of some oil wells, and that sounds boring, and it really is boring. So that's, I'm trying to be honest. Anyway, apart from that one case, I've enjoyed pretty much everything I've done for the last 3.5 years. And if you want a slightly different style of being a barrister, I mean, we all have completely different practices, but the commercial bar is great because you get time to think about things, and you get paid really well as well. So that's quite nice.
Thank you. Thanks. I think I just want to pick up on something that Freddie said, because without realising it, she probably made actually a really, really good point. Lots of people think they know what a barrister is, or they have an idea, and that usually comes from something they've seen on the telly, perfectly legitimate way to get your understanding of what we do. But the telly will always feature criminal cases, occasionally family cases, and actually the world of commercial practice isn't very well represented because people think it doesn't offer the same kind of drama that the more typical criminal cases might offer. But actually the commercial world can be just as fascinating and just as important. The reason I say that is because these kind of events will naturally attract the gobby barristers like me, who will happily come along and talk about what we do, freely and for hours. But we are one side of the bar, and there are all sorts of different facets to the bar and different practices at the bar. And so you really should use the time while you're training and learning to explore those and see which might be right for you. Because some people are very, very driven to one particular area of practice until they suddenly stumble upon another area of practice and realize that actually that's equally as fascinating and engaging. So please bear in mind as you move through your journey into law, whether it's the bar or the solicitors, that there's a whole, as much of the range of a human experience as there is, there's an area of law that deals with it. So thanks for making that point for us, Freddie. Thank you very much. What we're going to do now is throw the floor open to you. If any of you have any particular questions, please just put your hand up. We've got somebody with a roving mic, Richard, who'll come up to you. If there's a particular member of the panel that you want to ask your question to, say so. If not, we'll just throw it open to the panel, and whoever wants to put their hand up and take the question can do so. I think we've got one down here, Richard, to get us started.
Okay, just going to test that.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for sharing your experiences. It's really inspiring. My question was, I'm not sure how many of you are parents, but I'm parent to a really young baby, and sometimes that can throw me off, wanting this sort of career. So what's your advice to young parents who are unsure if it's the right move?
Well, we know Laurie was, because she told us that, so I'm going to start with you.
Such a good question. So when I came to the bar, I came with a very young baby, and I didn't tell anyone I had her. I think I used to put her in my handbag some days, because it was very different then. I then had my second child 10 years ago, and so I've kind of, from the beginning and then the middle part of my career, I've been a parent, and early on a single parent. So things are a lot better now. It's not easy. You need to be very well organised, but you also need to tap in. So, for example, like the inns, there are organisations, each area has its own organisation that will give you support and advice. But it makes you a better lawyer. Being a mother, I'm biased, it makes you a better lawyer because you know how to multitask, you're learning how to balance particular skill sets. So don't let it be a hindrance. In fact, let it be your motivation. Some people come to the bar with children for many reasons. I did it because I wanted to be a role model to my children, and I maintained it for those reasons. But we've still got a long way to go, particularly at the bar, because we're self-employed. So it's not as though an organisation is responsible for paying you mat leave, or there is no such thing. You take as long off as you can financially afford to do. So yeah, it is difficult, but there's many different organisations out there that can help and can assist. Also, the courts are getting much better at accommodating parents with needs, not just mums, but dads too. So for things like parents' evening, medical appointments, you've just got to be bold and say it. When I came to the bar, you wouldn't dare mention the fact that you'd like to leave early because little Johnny's broke his toe. He's just going to have to deal with it until I get home. But now, judges are happy to say, look, of course we won't sit past a certain time if you won't, and it's our responsibility as parents to make sure we push the judiciary and the profession to make sure that our parenting needs are first and then our professional needs are second. So absolutely use it as your motivation. It's not a hindrance at all.
May I just add something to that? Thank you very much. This is a problem we are quite aware of, and particularly once people have taken a break, not just because of parental leave, by the way, but also because there might be health issues or whatever. We have actually just started a scheme called Talent Retention Working Group, which makes it easier, we hope, for people who are returning to practice after a break. By, for example, having mutual support groups, mentoring schemes, and advocacy training or advocacy refresher training. Thank you very much.
Have you got any other parents on the panel? I don't have children myself, but I sit on our recruitment panel looking for pupils and also on the scholarship panel here at Middle Temple. And Laurianne makes a really good point. It's not just your motivation, but it can also be a way of demonstrating what lawyers or legal recruitment talk about as competencies, and those are the skills that you need to do the job that you're applying for. And somebody who has been a parent can demonstrate with examples the ability to manage their time effectively, to manage competing deadlines and priorities, to achieve a lot in a small amount of time, to be very organised and very structured, all of which are exactly the kind of tasks and task management that you'll be doing in practice. So instead of thinking of it as something which you've overcome, it's actually a way for you to demonstrate your skills. And that's important not just because it is a skill set that you're demonstrating, but it also helps shift the narrative about how the profession looks at parents, and instead of seeing them as a group with needs to be accommodated, recognising them as a group with particular skills and experience which will benefit the profession. So please don't let it be put off. Okay, next question, anybody? Please do, because otherwise I'll have hundreds and these guys will be here forever.
So I've got 2 questions. One is a bit of a general question, whoever wants to answer it can, and the other one's a bit more specific to my circumstances. First one is, how do barristers in the profession reconcile morality, ethics, and what is legal and lawful, and how do they affect change over a period of time to move society forwards? And the second question is, what advice would you give to mature students or professionals, I'm an engineer, and what kind of a timeline would it take, and would it be an advantageous position to be in as a professional engineer moving into law, or would it be like taking a step backwards to move forwards or sideways?
Okay, well, I'm going to start with the first question. I'll give a brief answer and then hand the microphone to the panel. They can answer as they feel fit. In practical terms, the way we balance morality with the realities of our practical life comes largely from the Code of Conduct. So people often will ask criminal barristers, how can you represent somebody if you know they're guilty? And there's a very clear answer to that in the Code of Conduct, which means if somebody tells us that they are guilty, we can represent them, but we can't represent that they are not guilty. So for most ethical questions like that, there is a practical answer. In terms of how you live with doing that, you have to really believe in the rule of law, and that sounds really sort of erudite and trite, but it's true. You have to believe that everybody's entitled to a defence. I'll give you a practical example. A really good friend of mine is representing Wayne Couzens, the police officer that murdered Sarah Everard, and she and her leader came in for a huge amount of slagging off on social media. And friends of mine who know what I do for a living have asked me about that case. And I say they have done a huge service by, first of all, not getting him to plead guilty, but setting out for him the challenges he might face having a trial and helping him get to a point where he can recognise that he was guilty, and the best thing to do was not put Sarah Everard's family through that horrific trial. So they represented probably the most hated criminal, certainly this year, but in doing so, they have furthered the public good. And second point, he is now appealing his sentence, and that has caused a rave of outrage because it seems so grossly misjudged. But in doing so, it will allow what will probably be a 5-judge Court of Appeal to hand down a judgment which will set the parameters for whole life tariffs, which we've been calling for a while, and we needed a case to take to the Court of Appeal. So that's a practical illustration of how we apply the Code of Conduct, and actually even doing the unpleasant parts of the job for the most unpleasant people is still in its own way a public service. And you have to hold on to that, and you have to believe in that principle of equality of arms, that everybody's entitled to be treated fairly, that we have to fight as much for the rights of the people that we don't like as the people that we laud as heroes. So that's my answer. I'm just going to pass it quickly down the panel.
to answer. But. Not much to add, except you might think in commercial law we don't have these sorts of debates very often, but we do, and most recently in respect of Russia. Now, I have a Russian client. I know that they're not currently sanctioned, but they might be. Do I stop acting for them? No. So what? I mean, they are, they might be the most evil person. They might have stolen all their money, but they have a right to be represented, and they have a right to the best representation they can get. And if that's me, that's me. So that's sort of all I'd add on that.
Well, in terms of morality within legal practice, it evidently depends on different fields and the way that you come up with those sort of dilemmas. I can only really speak for myself in the context of family law, and it can come in lots of different ways. You might have a client who holds beliefs or expresses views that are completely anathema or offensive to you, but I'm afraid that's part of the job. And it isn't your job to judge your clients or the witnesses or the people involved unless you are the judge. It might come up in the application of the law. So I gave the example of closed adoption. Closed adoption is quite controversial. I said there's no other country in the world that has it. It means you can have no contact with your parents until you are 18 and your parents can't contact you. There are some people that don't believe that that's right, that it's morally wrong, but that's for Parliament to decide through a democratic system. But there are little ways that you can, being part of the system and encouraging judges to make the right decisions and to bear in mind factors that they might not otherwise take into account. All of those little things that you can do day to day in your job do add up. I think that's probably all I can say on morality. There was an ethical code that we all have to abide to, which Teresa was referring to. But otherwise, I would say that there are some people who I think are campaigners in their field, and there's a debate about the extent to which barristers who are supposed to be objective and independent should align themselves with particular campaigns or law reforms, and whether that puts them in difficulty in terms of being a neutral and objective part of the profession. But some people are, particularly in family law, there are certain members of the bar who are part of prominent women's rights campaigns, who are fighting for reform in the areas of domestic abuse. And that is a way, I think, that you can be part of pushing for law reform. But if I could just give one quick example that I think is a good one, that some of you may have read in the newspapers in the past few years about certain members of the bar that were criticised for taking certain cases. And in this instance, I'm thinking of Dina Rose QC, who was criticised for taking a case before the Privy Council from a country who were trying to argue that their constitution didn't allow for gay marriage. Dina Rose who is an incredibly well-respected member of the bar, has been fighting for human rights for her whole career, and was labelled by various news outlets as a homophobe. The reality is that we have what's called the cab rank rule. If a case comes in, it's your case. It's not up to you to judge whether or not it is ethically meritorious. If you want to do this job, you are going to represent people that you don't like and that you might not want to represent. And that's part of the fun.
I think the vast majority of people that I represent do tend to be on the right side of things. They're escaping persecution. They've been trafficked to this country. That they're, I think they're not sort of morally abhorrent. But I do deportation cases where I'm representing people who have been convicted of crimes and are facing return to their home country. And they've either been found guilty by a jury or they've confessed to that crime. And in some cases, they have done really horrific things, probably in the worst cases, child abuse, and in one case, actually murdering a child. And I mean, as Simon said, I have to represent them because we have the cab rank rule. But I think the way I deal with it is we have to have a fair system for deportation. And there are people who are facing deportation who have made mistakes and have owned their mistakes and have children here who would be really badly affected if they had to leave the country, who have spouses here who would be affected, who have other family members. And it's really important that every single person who is going through the deportation system has somebody competent to represent them to make sure that that system is a system that works in all cases so that the right decisions are made. And I think that's how I sort of justify it and deal with it.
So I'm probably the other end of the spectrum because I only defend people charged with very serious offences, normally murder, terrorism and the like, or horrific sexual offences. And there's a saying in criminal law is that emotion is the enemy of reason. And the judgment simply is not mine to pass. And in order to do this job to the best of your ability and comply with your codes of conduct, you cannot stand up to cross-examine someone or to call your client to give evidence if in your mind you're thinking he is morally abhorrent. That will completely cloud your judgment. And if that's the case and you cannot reconcile that, go and find another job. You've got no place here. So that's how I deal with it. And also, the reality is you spend 20, 30, 40 years, however long, representing people, you are exposed to the horrific side of human nature, whether it's post-mortem photographs, whether it's hearing horrific accounts from victims. The way that you deal with that as an individual barrister is you look after your mental health, well-being, you take time, you find an outlet. I run every morning religiously. So we're not here as judges. The jury system in this country is the best system in the world. They are the 12 members of society that are called upon by us to pass judgment on their fellow citizens. Leave it to them. Leave it to them. It's not our job as lawyers.
No, sorry. I don't think there's anything further I can add, but I'm happy to answer the second question that you had in terms of your engineering background. So I would say, what type of engineering are you studying?
I'm a qualified electronic and electrical engineer.
Fantastic.
And I also did material science.
Right, okay, material science as well. So I would say that you're never too old to apply or to try a career at the bar. I was slightly older only because I did a 4-year degree, a master's, and then I qualified as a solicitor. So I wouldn't have classified myself as a mature student. But what I would say is the skills that you have established within an industry already are really going to set you aside. So the skills that you bring from that trade, you would then be able to directly transfer to, I would say, certain areas of law, such as, I'd assume, construction. I'm not a construction lawyer by any means, but I know that I've sat on pupillage committees as well, and when you have a CV in front of you where someone's done a science degree and they're wanting to practice in, say, for instance, clinical negligence, you know that they will already have an advantage because they have an understanding that is beyond that of your average barrister. So certainly highlight that. Don't shy away from the fact that you're a career changer, a mature student. There's no reason why you should shy away from that. And again, what I think chambers want to see is that you have a commercial awareness, that you understand what client care is, you understand essentially customer service, you understand how to speak to people. And if you have come from an industry where you've been front-facing and client-facing, that will hold you, that will anchor you very, very well, I'd say. So I hope that helps a little bit, rounding things up.
Thank you. Got any other questions from the audience? Yeah, we've got one here, Richard.
Just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for your insights. But this question is specifically for Freddie. So I know at the commercial bar, often when you're just starting out, it's very difficult to find advocacy opportunities. Could you speak to that a little bit or just add maybe more insight on that?
Yes. No.
Great, thank you.
No. you don't get them anywhere near as much as in other sets. I'm not in court every single day, but if I want to go to court, I can. You start off, I've done airline compensation claims, which were fun. I've done road traffic accidents, which were actually quite fun, and I mean that one. And you do those, and then I've also done a lot of employment law, and I've had 2 or 3 week-long trials just by myself. So that is, I mean, there's no comparison with everyone else here. I'm not in court every day, but I would say that is a fair amount of advocacy that I've done by myself, and I could have done more. It's just I also enjoy doing stuff where I can make someone else do all the talking.
I'm just going to add to that. Advocacy isn't just talking in court. There's all sorts of other types of advocacy. There's written advocacy. There's the advocacy of persuading judge in a case cost management hearing. There are all sorts of advocacy opportunities. They may not all be in court addressing a jury or a tribunal or fact finders, but there is more than just one type of advocacy. Oh, I can see a very enthusiastic news. Oh, yeah, forgive me. There's a reason that's Master Treasurer. If you didn't hear what she said, this is Maura McGowan, our Treasurer, pro bono. So you can balance your commercial practice with doing pro bono cases through Advocates, which is an organisation which offers legal representation to people who can't afford it and are excluded from the legal aid system. And that will include opportunities for advocacy and can include opportunities to do advocacy in an area of law that you don't routinely practice in. You look like you wanted to add something about that.
Yeah, only because I don't want it to look like I don't care about pro bono. No, that's not actually why. It's because there's also something called clips, which is really, really, really good. So if you, not a huge amount of barristers do it. You basically turn up at court, act for a litigant in person for a day, and then you go home. And that's wonderful pro bono because it doesn't take over the rest of your life, but you will also feel like a good person.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh.
Hi. This question is addressed to those of you working in common law chambers. I've noticed looking on common law chambers' websites, a lot of the sort of the younger juniors are quite specialised in what they do. And I just wanted to know what the feasibility was of keeping your practice reasonably broad as you go into your career.
Okay. Have we got, is that you?
Yeah, what I should say is I'm not in the same set of chambers as I started in. The chambers I started in was a much more of a common law set than the set that I'm in now, and it was very easy, certainly then, to do very diverse areas of law. The set I'm in now splits itself into 5 specialist teams, and it can actually be quite difficult to practice across 2 different teams. If your 2 teams were public and commercial, that would be easier than, for example, doing commercial and crime or commercial and family, but it is becoming harder, and I think common law sets, certainly the type of set that I did pupillage in, are becoming rarer and rarer, and people are being forced to specialise at a much earlier stage. But I think you need to talk to, if you get pupillage in a chambers, you need to talk to the person who's in charge of pupillage and explain that you want to have a diverse practice and the reasons for that. And I think most chambers will try and support you to do that, and as far as they're able to. In my set, for example, we have a system of 80-20. So although you do pupillage in a specialist team, you spend 80% of your time in that team, you do 20% with a supervisor in a completely different team. So I've had quite a few of the criminal pupils who've wanted to know about the immigration system, because it does cross over with things like deportation, but also with immigration offences, and they might be prosecuting or defending people for immigration offences. So it's really useful to have a knowledge of the immigration system as well. And that's something that Chambers is able to accommodate. I don't know if anyone else wants to.
Well, it obviously depends on different chambers run different systems. Some will provide you with a pupillage that will be quite strict and say you've got to move between the civil, the crime, the family team. Some will say, well, you are the specialist criminal pupil, but we want you to see bits of the others. So it does run differently like that. In terms of if you get through pupillage and then you get a tenancy, and as you say, people are specialising earlier, I think that's true. I think that's partly because each different areas of practice are becoming more complex. I mean, most areas now have their own sets of procedural rules that you've got to be familiar with, and I think you probably reach a stage where you think, just want a bit of an easy life without having to get brand new law out, brand new procedural rules every night. I mean, if you want to do that, I don't think there's anything stopping you, but I think in reality people do tend to specialise earlier. And there are, the other thing I'd say is, I can't speak for everybody else on the panel, but your practice area is something that you have limited control over. So you might start doing one particular thing, but within a year have completely changed. I mean, I knew I wanted to do child protection. That was all I ever wanted to do. And I think I sold being a barrister to mum on the basis that I was still helping children. And now I do mostly matrimonial finance law, and she thinks I've completely sold out. But that wasn't a choice. It sort of happened, and my practice drifted, and but there are people that do change practice later on in life, and one of the benefits actually of being in a common law practice is that if there's a sudden change in the wind for a certain area, and I give the example of personal injury, had a massive change a couple of years ago about how they get paid and the uplifts they get. And for some of them, it meant that they were earning a lot more money than they'd earned before. But if you're in a chambers that has other practice areas, it may be that you can expand your practice a bit more. I know a lot of criminal practitioners have been going into regulatory work and things like that, looking at coroners' courts. But I think that the question is a good one, but I wouldn't be worried about that.
We've got time, I think, for one more question, if we've got one. I've got one, sorry, from the lady at the front, Richard.
Oh, hi. I had a question for Christina, because I study Spanish up to A-levels, and I'm doing a Spanish course alongside my law degree, just for like the semester. So I was wondering how you utilise Spanish in your career as a barrister, and if it's opened up any extra opportunities or experiences because of like studying Spanish and like learning a bit more about the culture, and like the doors it's opened for you basically as well.
Yeah, well, my mum is Spanish, so I was brought up in a dual-speaking household, so I don't ever remember learning Spanish. The same as English has always been there for me, Spanish has always been there for me. But when I did my training contract, obviously I didn't qualify initially as a barrister, I qualified as a solicitor. So for those of you that don't know, you do a training contract that's usually 2 years. I did that at a high street firm in Brixton. And I was very fortunate because all it took really was one lady from Venezuela who knew no English at all. She came in with an issue surrounding domestic abuse, and she was trying to explain to the receptionist in Spanish that she wanted a lawyer, and I was there. And it opened so many opportunities because Elephant and Castle, Stockwell, Oval, there are huge Spanish and Portuguese speaking communities. So as a result of that and understanding the culture, understanding their fear of their own legal systems and how they interact with the police, especially members of the Bolivian and Colombian communities, I felt the trust they had in me. I felt very honoured. So I grew, I would say about 95% of my clients were Latinos or Hispanic. They were either Spanish or Portuguese speaking. And that really came as a result of word of mouth within the communities. And then the clients that I got that were in immigration, because I didn't do what's called a seat. So that's a period of time that you have within your training contract. I didn't have a seat in immigration, but I then referred them on and acted as interpreter to someone else at the firm. if anyone else speaks another language, I would 100% encourage you to look at, if time and finances allow, look at free legal service providers that work with those particular communities. I've got friends that speak French and have spoken, have helped with numerous communities that are French speaking, especially when there's a distrust, as I've mentioned, a distrust of the system, a distrust of the police, even educators. A lot of them have a distrust of the health system. They may be here, they may be overstayers, their immigration may be compromised. So it's a very nuanced, multifaceted issue when it comes to dealing with different communities or representing members of different communities. But I'm really pleased to hear that you're learning Spanish. And I would try and volunteer at either Casa Latina, Latin America House, or Latin American Women's Aid, LAWA, because they do phenomenal work. They're always understaffed. You don't need to be legally qualified. If you could act as an interpreter, the gratitude that I got from clients, they would bring me in food, they would bring me in items that they'd made, clothing for me, and it was amazing to see the transition between the fear that they felt towards the system, getting them through, say, for instance, the family courts, immigration courts, and then regulating their stay, and then they would flourish. It was just amazing. They would then set up their own businesses, and they would sign up to courses to learning English, and some of them had been here decades and didn't speak English. So keep going and approach me after if you want to talk more about it, because I could talk about it till mañana, as the Spanish would say. But there we go.
Thanks so much. Well, I think that brings us to 1 o'clock. So thank you all very much for your attention. I hope you'll join me in a round of applause to say thank you to our fantastic panel.